Welcome, welcome, welcome to Biz Dev Live. My name is Cameron Toth, and I am so excited to be bringing you Ian Ziskin today. When it comes to creating change in your life and in your organization, are you doing it intentionally? Are you doing it just because there's a problem that needs to be solved? Are you doing it because you have a plan and you want to get to a certain destination? That's what we're going to be talking about today. It's not an easy thing to do, whether you're a small organization, solopreneur, or an incredibly large organization. The takeaway is that it's possible. And not only is it possible, it's probable if you're intentional about it. Stay with me. We'll be right back after the Biz Dev Live theme.
Biz Dev Live, Biz Dev Live. Weekdays at 11 Eastern Time, live. Biz Dev Live, Biz Dev Live. Weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration, Biz Dev Live, Biz Dev Live. Business development, not even selling it. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is business development, not even selling it. Business development, not even selling it. Biz Dev Live, Biz Dev Live. Biz Dev Live. This is business development, not even selling it.
Ian Ziskin, president of EXec EXcel Group, has 40 years of experience as a business and human resources leader, board advisor, member, coach, consultant, entrepreneur, teacher, speaker, and author. Ian's global leadership experience includes serving in chief human resources and senior leadership roles with 3 Fortune 100 companies. He has a Master's of Industrial and Labor Relations degree from Cornell University. In addition, he's an alum of Binghamton University. Ian has written and edited 4 books, including his most recent, The Secret Sauce of Leading Transformational Change, which was released on June 1st. Congratulations on that, Ian. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being with me.
Great to be with you, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. So tell me a little bit about how you're helping people right now, and then we'll kind of get into some of the backstory.
Well, probably my number one focus right at the moment, and I appreciate you mentioning the book, is just literally about a week ago released this book called The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change, which has been an exciting project over the course of the last year or so, mostly because it's been a collaborative effort, with a community of what I like to call 200 voices in under 200 pages. So we've been able to gather input from a wide variety of senior leaders who've led transformational change, a number of coaches and consultants who help organizations to drive transformational change, and also a number of people who've been the victims or the recipients, if you will, of big change in their life or in their organizations. And doing what I can now to spread the word and share some of the nuggets of what we've learned from pulling this book together. So that's probably the number one thing that I'm doing to try to help other people right now.
Love it, love it, love it. So talk to me a little bit about this journey, because I can't imagine, you're waking up, you're 5 years old. I'm going to be the author of The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change. I imagine there was a bit of a journey to get there, right? And so what did little Ian want to be when he was growing up? And talk to us about parent influence, kind of what was on your mind and what that journey looked like to get to be Chief Human Resources Officer and senior positions in these top companies.
Yeah, sure. Happy to try to provide a little bit of background and context. I can assure you when I was 5, you're right, I wasn't thinking about writing a book on anything. I think at that point in my life, believe it or not, I was interested in being an architect. And it took me probably 4, 5, 6 years after that to figure out that I couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. So being an architect was probably not in my future. But I did recognize fairly early on something that did turn out to be a big part of my life and career, which was as a friend, ultimately as a student, as an athlete, as somebody who was in student government all through high school and into college as well, trying to help other people be successful, bring out the best in them. I didn't know exactly what all that would look like, frankly, over the course of life and career. But it turns out many years later, as we'll get into in a minute, both my career in human resources and developing leaders and even writing this book that I mentioned really has all come from that same place. Now, it also turns out that, if you think about early part of one's life, how does it influence us? In my particular case, and I actually write about this in the book too, I was very heavily influenced early on, about the age of 11, when my father became ill. It took a really long time in those days for medical professionals to figure out what was going on with him, but suddenly, started bumping into walls and other previously unmovable objects. After lots of analysis, it was determined that he had multiple sclerosis, which he suffered from for about 2 years, and then passed away from complications of multiple sclerosis. So I was, 13 at the time. My brother was 9, and I think for any kid at any age, losing a parent is something that really rocks you back. Watching my mother, go through that process and have to deal with all of that, but still remain strong and make sure that she was going to be the kind of parent for us that we needed at the time, and seeing how well she did that really inspired me. It also made me stop and think, however. It was kind of a moment in time, fork in the road sort of life experience, in the sense that I remember even thinking then, at the age of 13, right after my father died, this is one of those times in life when you can spend a lot of time feeling sorry for yourself and using an event like this, as negative as it was, as an excuse for not doing certain things or getting into a downward spiral. Or you can kind of step back, think about how you're going to respond to a situation that, in that case, I had no control over. It happened, and it happened to us and our family. But, could I take anything away from it? Could I end up learning something as a result of it? Could I be a better person, maybe even a more serious person than I might have otherwise been? And it's hard to tell, obviously, how much something like that actually changes us. But in my case, even at that early age, I do remember being influenced by trying to turn lemons into lemonade, so to speak, and see if I can learn anything positive from going through that type of negative experience. The reason I mention it is because I think it influenced me pretty heavily as I got into my teenage years, and then deciding what I was going to do in college.
Yeah, you can definitely hear it from your story. You're starting to see the human side of human resources, right? And I don't think that's ever left you, right?
Yeah, it's really never left me. I paid a lot of attention at the time, even though I was pretty young, to not only, what I was going through and how I was reacting to it, but watching my mother and my brother and, various other relatives and family, friends all be affected by this. I wasn't smart enough or experienced enough, or maybe just mature enough at the time, to really know what was going on in my head. But what I think I found later was that it brought out in me this gene of trying to help other people better deal with and handle difficult things. And those difficult things could be on a personal level, or they could be on an organizational and career level. In a strange way, I think it kind of pushed me toward the direction of business first, and then ultimately, as I was studying business as an undergrad, picked up the interest in human resources and what it was I could do to help make individual people as well as organizations the best they could be and as effective as they could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were starting on this road of talking about how you were sort of transitioning here. So keep us going on this path. I think it's really interesting that you were dealing with a lot of this stuff at a young age, and then now you're making these sort of choices on education. And I find for so many young people, including myself, for me, it was more about my father was affected by things. And so, I realized much later that what was kind of going on, I just was sort of walking through it clueless. And so my own educational journey, some of the pieces weren't there because my father had done such a great job in my early education. Sixth grade, I got a letter from Barbara and George Bush on, how well I was doing, President's Award for stuff. That quickly kind of, as I went through middle school and high school, went away. And, I'm go back and examine my life story. Like, oh, well, that's what was going on, because my father was doing it on his own. Because he had his best friend die, his parents soon, my grandparents died soon after. He was dealing with loss of one and then taking care of the other. And so he had a lot going on. And it was very, very difficult to kind of keep up with a teenager and all the challenges that a teenager goes through, right? And so it's easy for me to go back now and sort of see what the missing pieces are, but very difficult while you're going through it. And I think that's an important piece, right?
Yeah, for sure. We get the benefit of hindsight. Absolutely. The other benefit that I had, and I don't know if you experienced the same thing, was, as I got a little older, saw what was going on in my friends' lives and their families, high school, college, certainly, and even after college and graduate school. If you pay any attention at all, one thing you recognize pretty quickly is, if you think you have problems or difficult obstacles to overcome, just look around at other people's lives. I consider myself somebody who is very fortunate, despite going through this, disruptive, negative experience early in my life, losing my father. Despite all that, I consider myself to be an extremely fortunate, lucky person. I was surrounded by people who loved and cared about me and believed in me. And I've had lots of opportunities that I've tried to take advantage of. I'm sure I've been more successful at some than others. I've been able to get a good education and had some great jobs and a phenomenal, exciting career where I've learned a ton. Not everybody is as lucky as I have been to have those kinds of opportunities and have the sort of support and mentoring, et cetera, along the way. And again, going all the way back to some of those earlier years growing up, it's difficult, as you were saying, Cameron, to necessarily see it in the moment. But when you step back and you look at it historically, you realize that you're influenced to a large degree by all of these different types of experiences, and every one of them, not to over dramatize it, but every one of them represents a fork in the road, where you've got a decision to make about you're going to take something positive from this experience, learn from it, grow, move on, or you're going to spend a lot of time whining and complaining and being negative about something that might have happened to you that you perhaps had no control over, and use it as an excuse not to achieve the things that you otherwise could have and should have achieved. And I've just chosen where I could, to the best of my ability, to be conscious and intentional, to your point about intentionality, to intentionally move down the path of taking something positive from it, learn, grow, and figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations around communication lately that talk about, the choices we make and what we say. What is the thing that we're putting out in terms of communication, something that's going to move the situation forward, or are we just reacting to the moment? And so I feel a certain way, and so that's what's coming out of my mouth, or am I making the intentional choice? This is the outcome that I want. this is where I want to go. This is how I want to make people feel. And so this is what I'm going to say. Right. And so I think that's a big deal, and definitely a part of the growing and maturing piece of our lives. So where did you grow up?
Grew up primarily in a place called Massapequa, New York, which is
Yep.
on Long Island, just about an hour east of New York City.
All right. And then how did you end up in Binghamton?
Well, when I was in high school, I was focusing on, do the best I could as a student, and try to give myself as many options and alternatives as I could in terms of where I went to college. But I also recognized pretty fast, reality takes over, which is, having gone through this experience of losing my father. My mother was working hard trying to support us. Most of her roles were administrative assistant, executive assistant kind of jobs. She hadn't worked for many years after my brother and I were born, so she was getting back into the workforce as we were teenagers and getting ready to make decisions about college. One of the realities that I had to face was, go to the best school you could go to with the best education you could get, but budget was going to matter a lot. And so, was fortunate enough to be, living in New York State, where the state educational system, public university system was and still is quite good. And Binghamton University, State University of New York at Binghamton, as it was called at the time, really represented a very positive, viable option for me to go get an education in business, which is what I wanted to do, but to do it with the best chance of being able to come out of 4 years of college debt-free, which I thought was important then, more than 40 years ago. But as I see the burden that a lot of people are dealing with these days in the current economy, trying to dig out from student debt, that's a pile that's extremely difficult to ever dig your way out of. I recognize I was, yet once again, fortunate to be able to get a, very high quality education for a very reasonable cost at that time. That's how I ended up there.
I love it. I love it. And what was the journey from Binghamton to Cornell? Was that a straight shot?
Well, it was a straight shot, but it was kind of a crooked straight shot. And what I mean by that is that, when I was an undergrad studying business, I was taking all the typical courses of accounting and finance and marketing and operations and all the typical things that you would take, and kind of stumbled across several courses that at the time were called personnel management. It wasn't even called human resources at the time, which I didn't really know much about at first, but I found really intrigued me, almost immediately. And the reason I became so intrigued by it was it seemed very intuitively obvious that, any business was highly dependent on the quality of its talent and the quality of its culture in the organization. Yet the profession of personnel, as it was called again at that time, didn't really seem to be all that strong, frankly. There seemed to be kind of struggling as a professional arena in terms of its relevance in business compared to all these other tracks and disciplines of marketing and finance and accounting and operations. And so that immediately caught my attention, because I wanted to be able to reconcile what appeared to be this incongruity between importance of talent on one hand and the relative lack of influence and perhaps even respect of the profession. So I wanted to learn more about that. And then I ended up discovering that Cornell University, which is only an hour away from Binghamton, has this great industrial and labor relations school, and both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And then once again, I was fortunate enough to get accepted at Cornell to get my master's in industrial and labor relations, which was obviously diving in much more deeply to the study of human resources. And I figured within 2 weeks of being in grad school, I was either going to know I loved it or I hated it, because it was an intense deep dive into that particular subject. And I was very pleased to find out really in 2 weeks or less that really thought I was going to love the profession and the content and what I was learning. And that set me on the path of, 40 years later, still being heavily involved in human resources and leadership kind of stuff.
Love it. And so what sort of ignited the passion to sort of, because I mean, I'm sure you were looking at different things, right? CEO positions. What sort of ignited the underlying, like, I have this deep passion for working on the human relations side.
Yeah, it somewhat evolved over time, as you can imagine. It wasn't all immediately clear to me, but when I think about it over extended period of time, what really fascinated me was the blend of three things and trying to get the right balance in these three things: the importance of leadership, the importance of other kinds of talent in the organization, and the importance of culture. You know, having the right environment for people to excel and do their best and contribute their best and learn and grow at the same time. I found all of those things really interested me a lot, and recognized even fairly early on in my career, there was a very high connection and correlation between all those three things if your organization was going to be successful, and frankly, if you as an individual were going to be successful as well. And so, you know, a career in human resources, even though there are a lot of other aspects to the HR profession that people might recognize, and I've, you know, been involved in and had jobs related to all of those other aspects, those three core things that I just mentioned of leadership, talent, and culture really was what motivated me, got me jazzed up, and wanting to see what way I could contribute to organizations. Now, I know there's, you know, listening in, probably a lot of people who work for larger companies or have, but maybe even more people who are more entrepreneurial in their bent. And I've been somebody who's been, again, I think lucky enough to have experience in both. You know, where if I look back now over a 40-year career, I've kind of done it in two chunks. The first 28 years of my career was spent working for very large companies, and all of the things that implies in terms of resources and quality of people, and the breadth and depth of the things you learn and get exposed to in working for a large company. The last 12 years of my career have been much more entrepreneurial, running my own coaching and consulting business, and learning how to get things done with no resources and no bureaucracy, and without, you know, 27 meetings to prepare for meetings. And so
Yeah.
I think I've seen the best and the worst, you know, of both kinds of organizations, and can honestly say, you know, after 40 years of doing this, I love both for different reasons, but I've loved both the big company life and the more entrepreneurial life, and they've reinforced one another, at least in my personal case, extremely well.
Well, so great segue into some of these takeaways here, right? So talk to us, because you've been, you know, at the TRW Automotive, Quest, you've been at Northrop Grumman, which is huge, right? Just an incredibly large organization, and now an entrepreneur. So talk to us about some of these lessons learned as you walk through your career, particularly when it comes to intentionality and the choices that you've seen and experienced and made as you've been going through this journey.
Well, you know, one of the greatest pieces of advice I've ever got in my career was from a, you know, career-long mentor, and actually a boss. I worked for him as well, who told me pretty early in my career, find a void and fill it. And I've tried to follow that advice in every job that I've been in, both in my corporate life as well as now doing the coaching and consulting that we'll talk more about. You know, every organization, every individual has strengths and has weaknesses. Every organization and every individual has things that they are really good at and prefer to do, and other things that need to get done, but either the individual or the organization is just not that interested in it or not that good at it to address those things. And I've always tried to build on my own strengths, but also pay attention to other people's strengths. But at the same time, you can pretty quickly size up, if you pay attention, what's not getting done or what's not getting done well. And if you can jump into the middle of that, two good things happen. One for you and one for the organization. For you, the individual, you'll learn something new and develop a track record of getting important things done that nobody else, for whatever reasons, has been able to address. And for the organization's benefit, something important that needs to get done that has been under-addressed or unaddressed gets fixed. And you start to develop a reputation as somebody who can get things done and get things done quickly. And that's been, great career advice and personal advice that I've tried to apply in every circumstance and situation that I've been in. And then the other lesson that served me quite well many times over 40 years, both corporate life and life as an entrepreneur, is develop a broad base of experience going through a lot of circumstances and situations, some of which are going to be comfortable and familiar, and you're going to be pretty good at it, and some of which are going to be completely unfamiliar, very uncomfortable. You're not sure whether you're going to be good at it. You're laying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you're ever going to be able to get it done and learn what you need to learn in order to get it accomplished effectively. And frankly, those are the times when you really know that you're being developed and stretched and you're learning something new.
So let me ask this question, because I know you've been through these periods where something had to change, right? There was a problem that came up in the organization. So I'd love you to tell some stories about something that came up, with one of these large organizations that you were working with, and how you sort of shifted the narrative, the actual running of the organization, the actual way that, people were running things, and what that approach looked like and what that outcome looked like. And I know that you've talked about in the setup of the show, the failures and the successes. I think both are probably, the failures are probably more interesting and more revealing in terms of what not to do and than what to do. So I'd love to hear some of those stories.
Yeah. Let me give you a couple of examples. Maybe we'll start with pulling from the two chief human resources officer roles that I had toward the latter part of my corporate life. So first, now going back 20 years ago, my first chief HR officer job is with a company called Quest Communications in the telecom space. Shortly after I got there, the entire world kind of stopped as a result of the tragedy of September 11th. That had huge implications for lots of people around the world, and certainly lots of companies, including Quest, and including in the telecom industry, which basically went into a giant tailspin for several years. So when I first arrived at Quest, part of my mission was to help merge together what were two previously independent companies, Quest, which was a smaller company, and US West, which was a regional Bell operating company. It was larger than Quest, but actually was acquired by Quest. And merging together the cultures of these two companies and trying to take advantage of the leadership and the talent and the culture that I was referring to earlier to build a better, stronger company was part of my main mission in coming into that job. And was doing a lot of those things, but I can assure you what I spent most of my time doing in the time that I was there was trying to help the company survive, because it was literally going through a complete implosion. So, spent the better part of 2 years.
And what were the specific issues? Because I know, with September 11, we talk about these things, but businesses, and I know, speaking, from my own kind of thing, my business faced, as we went into the pandemic, right? I have a business that's based on live events. And so, certain businesses have done well during the pandemic, but businesses that were based on people getting together and didn't have any other revenue streams faced unique challenges, right? Where other businesses could pivot to another revenue source or that sort of thing. So what were some of the challenges? What were some of the challenges to the business in terms of income, people, that sort of thing that was happening at that time?
Yeah, I think there are some common lessons learned. You know, anybody who's listening in on our conversation right now, you know, can certainly relate to the last 2 years of COVID and all of the uncertainty that's been created by that, and the fact that people have to completely redefine their business model and their approach to business during that period of time. Maybe we'll come back and talk about COVID in a bit. But if you roll back the calendar 20 years or more and just use 9/11 as another example, it was a major disruption that people didn't see coming. And one thing that I'll just draw on a lesson learned that I picked up from writing this book on leading transformational change is that whether it was 20 years ago or today, there's this misconception that most people have that leading change of any kind is planned for, anticipated. You're able to think a lot about it. You're purposeful. You're intentional, to use that word that we've been talking about. And therefore, somehow, because you're doing all this planning and preparation, it's a very strategic approach that you're thinking your way through. Well, it turns out there's plenty of examples of that type of transformational change, but there are actually a lot more examples that are things unplanned for, unanticipated. People are really not adequately prepared. And it's really much more, success is really much more about the recognition of reality, taking action in a decisive way, moving fairly quickly to take that action and delivering results and response. And I mention all of that because those were all things that I wasn't necessarily thinking about in the moment 20 plus years ago. But, in the telecom industry, had a lot of excess capacity in fiber optic cable. That was a technology innovation that was being introduced at the time. Quest and many other telecom companies had invested extremely heavily in building out their fiber optic capacity and networks. And then all of a sudden, the world stopped spending money, stopped traveling. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of worry and concern. People were, really dialing back budget and expenditure and laying people off rather than hiring people.
And it's really crazy because we're right there again, right? So even though we've been through a pandemic the last 2 years, for some reason, a lot of people were on this high. Business is going forward. Yes, we got challenges, and now like everybody's on the precipice because potential recession, right? And so being prepared, right? I mean, I think these are great lessons learned. It's like it doesn't stop, right? There's always these considerations. And I think the long-term view, right, looking through, the last 20, 30, 100 years, I think it was really interesting. I was not very familiar with the 1918 epidemic, right, pandemic, before the whole, pandemic now, but I've gotten real familiar because this is how you tell the future, right? This is how you understand what's coming forward, right? And so then communicating that to a team and communicating that to your people, because obviously there's the short-term challenges of cash flow, the money stops coming in, right? All businesses deal with this. It's all cyclical.
Yeah, all businesses deal with it. It's all cyclical. And the other, I think, given, to be honest, is that it's inevitable that things will go wrong that are not planned for, not anticipated. So I'm not suggesting in any way that you don't want to be anticipatory. You don't want to be intentional. It's a really important asset, as a leader or as a person, to be able to see around corners, pay attention to what's going on in the world around you, and do the best you can to anticipate things that could go wrong and happen, both at a personal level, but also at an organizational level. But whether it was 9/11 or now the last couple of years, the pandemic, I'm pretty certain most people, certainly not me, I wasn't smart enough to see COVID coming. And so the organizations that have done the best in almost all of these examples over history of weird, bad things that have happened is the fact that you have to have a capacity, both as an individual, as a leader of other people, but also as an organization in terms of culturally, to face reality. One of the biggest mistakes I see made, and I've made this mistake many times myself, so that's why I can share it so clearly, is the average human being has a tendency to see things as they wish they were, not as they really are. And people and organizations that do the best job of dealing with these large-scale disruptions that we're all finding ourselves faced with, whether it's COVID now or whether it was 9/11 20 years ago, is the fact that they more quickly than most people understand reality. They recognize the situation is what it is. We are where we are. We have to face into that and deal with the circumstance. And, just to tie two things together, if I could for a moment,
Yeah.
I'm going to take us all the way back to the conversation we started with about, myself growing up and, what I learned from the experience of my father's death. One of the main things that I learned from that experience was that wasn't the reality that I was hoping for, but the situation was what it was. And we were where we were, as a family. And frankly, it sucked that my father got sick and died. But the fact that it sucked didn't change the situation. What was going to change the situation was, what was I as an individual and my mother and brother and other family and friends going to do about it from that point on. So you could spend a lot of time in denial and being upset, which doesn't really help you much. Or you can spend a lot of time trying to decide how are you going to respond, how are you going to recover, being agile enough, being resilient enough to try to learn and grow from the experience. I think those lessons apply to, my first chief HR officer job working for Quest Communications 20 years ago when 9/11 hit. And it also applies to, today and the last 2 years, not only for myself, but, everybody else. Who've had to learn how to cope with the reality of masks and vaccines and restrictions and working remotely and remote school and economic uncertainty and political division and all these other outcomes that have surfaced as a result of the pandemic, not to mention the challenges to people's physical and emotional well-being. And, in the United States now, over 1 million people have died as a result of COVID. That's horrible. And the question is, what are we going to learn as individuals and as a society from this experience that we can then be better, smarter, more effective in dealing with future disruptions, because there will be future disruptions.
Yeah, and I just want to pepper this because I think the important thing to understand, as you're talking about this, right? You got great tragedies. I think about the news that I'm getting, daily on school shootings. And so, all right, there's this thing happening in the world. And you have all of these teachers that have an incredibly important profession. They're not always appreciated for it. And so how do you as a principal, and I remember, my daughter was telling me how the leaders addressed it. And I was unhappy. I was unhappy with the way that they addressed it, because when you're communicating around these things, you can choose to communicate in a way where you highlight the mission, what we're here to do. You acknowledge what's happening, but you do it in such a way that you reinforce people's understanding of their own personal safety, because they have the pieces in place at that particular school. And you can talk about how you're supporting, or you can just focus on the negative aspects. And we've seen leaders, presidents, congressmen, CEOs, whether they're tweeting or any other thing. And I mean, we're hearing it now, some of these folks, I'm like, they're talking about these recessions. And I'm like, very much in the sense of, listen, man, if you don't have anything positive to say, let's close it down, because I understand there's a wind shifting. I understand there's a problem. What are we doing about it? How are we moving forward? And so it goes back to that intentionality around communication. What are we choosing to communicate? We want to be realistic, listen, you're talking to your family, your mom, you're talking to the kids. Dad has a challenge, but we're going to get through this, right? And so, because life does go on for the rest of us. And so what do we make of it? How do we actually move forward and create a more positive future? How do we prevent some of this bad stuff that's going on? Like what are we focusing on? And I think that's so incredible to be able to read what's going on and communicate in a way where we're uplifting people and we're moving things forward in a positive direction. That may mean, in camping, that may mean, okay, there's challenges coming. We have these things that we have to hit, because in order for us to get through this cash flow situation, we need to go after account receivables, right? Whatever the case may be, but let's be proactive, right?
Well, I 100% agree with you that these situations that the world has been dealing with, these shootings, and not to get too political, but you hate to see circumstance where people feel, almost anywhere they go, they're unsafe, right? You can't really run a society where people can't go to the grocery store or your kids can't go to school without feeling safe. And that's, irrespective of whatever somebody's, personal views might be about the Second Amendment. But I've also learned across a whole host of issues that you were talking, Cameron, about communication. The natural tendency, I think, for most people when we talk about the importance of communication as a leader or as a person, is to first focus on, telling, right? I'm going to tell you some stuff. I'm going to communicate with you in a way that lets you know what's going on. That's extremely important. So I don't want to underestimate the importance of all that. However, there's something that is more often overlooked, which I think has always been important, but it's becoming even more important in this polarized society that we live in. And that is listening. Listening is a really important element of communication, even more important than telling. It's to be able to interact with, sit down with people, even people you disagree with or you don't like, and listen long enough to understand in a respectful way their point of view. Again, even if you disagree with it, it's extremely valuable to understand where somebody else is coming from, because that's the best chance you actually have of persuading and educating them to a different point of view. You have to first understand the other person, and therefore,
and it's challenging because everybody's got a bully pulpit with social media.
Sure.
Even CEOs of companies, right? And we can think of a few notable CEOs right now rocking it out on Twitter, and it's questionable whether they're just a marketing genius or they're actually a good leader, right? And so the idea that you can get all of this positive feedback, as you got this sort of echo room kind of thing. You say something and there's somebody that's going to agree with it, whether it's a culture of celebrity, whatever the case may be, but you're going to have supporters. But the point that you're bringing in here, which I think is incredibly important, is you have people that are actually affected by the things that you say, and are you actually listening to them, and then going back to that piece again, is the thing that you're saying doing the best thing for everybody that's in your life?
That's right. And one particular aspect that I think connects a lot to listening, which, to be honest, we've always known how important that is, even when we're not particularly good at it. The thing that's changed a lot in the last couple of years, that's getting a lot of play right now, in the importance of leadership, and the importance of human beings, frankly, whether you're in a leadership role or not, is empathy, and the ability to demonstrate empathy and an understanding of and an appreciation for what other people are going through. I'll be the first one to admit, when you talk about success and failure, am I a caring, concerned person and worry about other people's needs? Yes, absolutely. But I'm also the kind of person who, believes in, suck it up, do what you have to do, take personal accountability and responsibility for getting things done. And because I'm that sort of a person and personality, I will freely admit that the first thing that comes to mind historically for me is not, pay more attention to what the other person might be going through in the moment that's preventing them from getting things done or being as good a person or as understanding a person as they should be. I tend to just say, it's your responsibility, fix it. And, that's a weakness of mine that I've really tried to pay a lot of attention to over the course of the last couple of years, as everybody has been, not really at their best, frankly.
And talk to me, because I know you've been in charge of programs where you've had to train and, been in that position of, okay, we have to kind of create a little bit of change
right
around that, because that is something, I go through, I think, on a daily basis, right?
We all do.
CEO of a company that employs a lot of numbers of part-time staff. And so you're constantly in the position of, there's stuff going on in your life. There's stuff that's going on in the job. And so we have to navigate the careful balance of, you're a person, there's a job, there's commitment that you have, right? And so what have you sort of done around that work-life balance piece? Your job is your job. This is what we got to do. You can't necessarily leave it all at home, as I think we all wish we could just kind of, shut down. I love the Apple Plus show. I've mentioned a couple of times on this show, because I think it's very apropos for a lot of the things that are discussed when you're talking about entrepreneurship, but they, have severed the brain so that when you show up at work, it's a whole nother, it's a whole nother person. And when you go home, that, you don't remember anything in the work environment on Apple Plus TV. It's a crazy concept. Exactly for that reason. It's not possible, right? You can't separate your work life from your personal life.
Well, maybe the best living example of individual and organizational empathy that we're seeing now, or at least an attempt at empathy, is a lot of organizations trying to figure out how to get the balance right between remote work, which a lot of places had to move to over the course of the last 2 years, versus now the pressure or the preference to bring people back, quote unquote, to the office, versus the hybrid approach that many organizations are starting to figure out over time. And, you have a lot of leaders whose natural tendency would be to say, I want everybody back working together face to face in the office. That's the way we can be most productive and build relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of legitimacy to that, of course. But there's also a tremendous amount of pressure and a lot of power, frankly, in the workforce, where a lot of people are saying, I just can't deal with the commute anymore. I've got family issues, kids, elderly parents that I've got to take care of, other pressures in my life, and I can actually be much more productive if I'm not spending, 2 to 3 hours a day sitting in on a freeway, going to and from work, or, on a train on a long commute. And so, people are looking for a much higher degree of flexibility as members of the workforce than they ever have historically. And frankly, given some of the talent shortages that a lot of companies and entire industries are wrestling with right now, individual workers in the workforce actually have a lot more power and influence than they used to, because they have multiple choices about where they can go to work. And they're exercising.
We're experiencing this in so many ways all across the world right now, right?
Yeah. And, I don't care if you're an entrepreneur, running a business by yourself, or you're, CEO of a company that has, 300,000 people working there. Everybody is affected by this, not to mention the fact that, obviously there are all kinds of industries and jobs that, for very good reasons, can't be done remotely. If you're a caregiver in the medical profession working in a hospital, or if you're a welder or a machine operator working in a manufacturing facility, you're not going to do those kinds of jobs and many others from home. And, there's a concern about different flexibility for different people. And I recognize all that. But here's the point, which ties back to our conversation about empathy. Empathetic leaders, we're learning, and we're now beginning to teach them, have to do a much better job of understanding the individual, unique circumstances that each person is facing, and recognize that, if you expect people in the spirit of diversity and inclusion, for example, to bring their entire selves to work, then the organization actually has to be prepared to deal with the entire self, which includes the personal challenges and the need to help people with mental health concerns, and making sure that they're taking good care of themselves and replenishing their own energy. If in fact you expect them to come to work to take care of your customers. And this is really all about understanding the needs and the expectations of the people who work with and for you, not just evaluating everything from the perspective of, me as the boss, this is what I need, this is what I expect. I mean, I think as a leader, you need to tell people what you need from them and what you expect.
It also takes, to me, and forgive me for jumping in here, but it going to like the business school kind of mentality, it means you need to build a business that has higher margins, right? And I know that, everybody's looking for like the cheaper thing, and I'm trying to run a business and I'm getting sales, but I think one of the big entrepreneurship lessons is you got to build a business where, you see a void and you fill it, but when you're filling that void, you're building something that you can truly take care of people from the start. Because we see, and I know even within my business, I've definitely made this mistake when building it, never thought about these things. Like, from day one, I think there was this sort of slight idea that, we need to do like employee parties. And that's just like the top, very, very top of like the iceberg. Training sessions, conversations, time to get staff to meet each other, bringing families in, healthcare benefits, all of these different things that are a part of it. And so if you're not thinking about a lot of those long-term pieces, employee programs, maybe even daycare, depending on the type of business that you have, you're not going to retain your people, not in this world, right? And so I think it's really interesting from the business case standpoint, like, hey, we have to think about these things as we're getting started in business. I'm interested as we kind of wrap things up, and maybe you'll share some of your entrepreneur lessons there. I just want to bring Sharon Mundy's comment in here. I recently heard Skilla Elworthy, world-renowned peace builder and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, latest book, Pioneering the Post, state that the number one thing she worked with global leaders with is empathetic listening. They didn't feel they needed it until she walked them through some concepts, and they were stunned at the truth of this. Thank you. I could not agree more. Beautiful message, beautiful heart. So thank you for that. And if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, on LinkedIn, smash the love button, the like button. Really appreciate you watching this, and I think this message needs to be spread far and wide, because these are the types of things that truly make our world a better place when people are thinking about these things a lot more holistically. And then from the business point of view, making sure the budget is there, that makes a good business, right? I think about a business like Apple, and I think one of the things that they've gotten right in terms of building their business, and you can point to Apple in a lot of different ways, but they built a business around a profit margin that allows them to take care of their employees in such a way. And obviously they're the biggest guy on the block, and they've created an enormously successful product and filled a void in a very unique kind of way. But we can all do that. And so if we're not doing a race to the bottom, right, we can all do that.
Well, if I can offer a perspective on that, something, I've learned being a leader in large companies, being an entrepreneur, running my own business, circumstances are a bit different, but they're really the same. And here's what I mean by that. Yes, it's true that it costs money to treat people well. However, it costs more money to treat people poorly. And the better job that you do of taking care of the people who work with and for you, the better job they're going to do taking care of your clients and customers. And that's really the equation that's most important to build. That's point number one. Point number two is, while it does cost money to do a lot of programmatic sorts of things to support your people, it doesn't really cost money to be a better listener, more empathetic, and willing to treat people with dignity and respect, and have them feel like they've got a voice and some influence in how the organization is being run, and how they themselves, their co-workers and their customers, are being treated. Treating people with empathy and kindness and good listening, and treating them with respect, frankly, doesn't cost money. It takes some time, and it takes some discipline and effort, but it's a lot less expensive than treating your people and your customers like crap, frankly, and not having them be loyal, committed followers.
Yeah, Susan Lynn Castelli says, costs money and credibility and reputation.
Absolutely.
At the end, when you're trying to think long term, which I hope everybody watching this program is trying to think long term, right? The idea that those things are going to make you money over time, when people can believe in what you're doing, when they can stand behind what you're doing, you get that kind of cult of respect that really, really creates things. And Sharon says, I think of this daily as I left the medical field from lack of empathy. I ended up a traumatized patient from the lack of empathy from the doctors. My main mission in life is all around this, which further takes self-resourcing skills to be present with one's attention. Jill Bolte Taylor says that in times past, they trained doctors to not have empathy. We're standing to change this. I love that. All right. So, Ian, tell us how people can get connected with you, where they can pick up the book. I'll put that up on the screen, let you have the last word, and I'll place off with the BizDev Live theme. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for helping to spread this message. Love it.
Really great to be with you all. I appreciate the interest and the great conversation. For those of you who are interested in the book, you can do a little bit of one-stop shopping at www.transformationalchangebook.com, where you can learn more about the various chapters, the contributing authors, and take advantage of discount code and working directly with the publisher to order the book. You can also reach me. Simplest way is via email, Ziskin at EXecGroup.com. And I look forward to being in touch with as many of you as possible. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate you. And here we go. Thanks. See you next week, everybody.
BizDev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time, live. BizDev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. BizDev Live, business development, not even selling it. BizD with C, brought to you by Cameron T. BizD with C. you by Cameron T. Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. Not even selling it, not even selling it. This is business development, not even selling it. Business development, not even selling it. Biz Dev Live, Biz Dev Live. Biz Dev Live.